I hope the quality of the streaming will be full HD. I don't know up to this point if it is clear or not, but today we will analyze the game played between Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana in the Champions Chess Tour Chessable Masters. I would say this is the first game. Let's just check. Yes, it's the first game played by Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana, and it simply features so many, ideal positions and ideal games and ideal ideas between these two guys. Fabiano Caruana, just to spoil, some random facts. Fabiano Caruana won the game and won the tournament. So Fabiano here in this position was with white, and Hikaru Nakamura was with black. So I would definitely say the analysis after this position and after we finish, but right now we're gonna simply analyze the game. Let's just set up correctly the board and we will start definitely. Okay, everything is set up. Let's just refresh the page because I have to okay, good. So Fabiano Caruana started with e4. He is very universal. He can play e4, he can play d4, he can play c4. He played them all over the board in online games. So there is nothing to fear about Fabiano Caruana in his own preparations. So e4, c5, Hikaru Nakamura played the Sicilian. He wanted actually a dynamic game. He wants to, surprise Fabiano Caruana. Although there is nothing to surprise about. There's nothing to be surprised, actually. The Sicilians already played tons of times, hundreds of millions of times online and over the board. So nothing, special. Knight to f3. At this position you can play the Alpin with the c3. You can play the closed Sicilian with knight to c3. But Hikaru is faced right now with the option of playing knight to f3. So Caruana played knight f3, and now Hikaru Nakamura plays knight to c6, which is the old Sicilian variation, aiming at simply blocking the d4 push by making white's task very hard, to achieve that central push. I'm gonna continue analyzing. I was interrupted by my brother. So e4, c5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5. This is the Rossolimo variation, which is, by the way, aiming directly at denying the counterplay by black. If you take on c6, I can, push the d4 with a relief. But of course, Nakamura won't allow that, obviously. So e5, aiming at simply, it's not really a good variation because it weakens the d5 square. At some point, white will have a plan of knight to c3, knight to d5. So d5 is permanently weakened. It's a weak square. It can be, it could be used and exploited. So e5 aiming at simply blocking at all the push d4. Even if you take on c6, the d4 now is obviously impossible. So you must now waste another tempo by playing c3. c3 then d4. And there is c5 and e5 that you should take rid of. So white's castle here, I would say there isn't something else to be played in this position, although you may have c3 at your disposal, but white wants to secure his position, and if you see the time, 15 minutes for both of them, with no low time. I mean, they already prepared all of these moves in advance. So bishop to d6. One of the key ideas of this move is simply to play bishop to c7 to protect the e5 pawn in case the c6 knight is captured. And d4. Now I don't know why he played d4. In theory, this isn't played. You should simply play c3 in this variation to support the d4 push. So probably Hikaru in this position was a little bit surprised because there's no games in the database probably played from this position. I would say 11 games, and the only move here is knight take on d4. So it is probably a gambit, aiming at gaining some activity with white pieces, probably opening up this diagonal for this bishop to secure this square for the knight to g5 and to penetrate, to do some attacks on the f7 square, probably because the bishop already doesn't have much to do on this a4 d7 or a4 e8 square. So he may go, for example, to bishop to c4. I don't know. I mean, I need to continue playing the moves to see and to understand. So knight takes on d4, bishop to c4. So he aims directly at attacking this f7 pawn, with the aims of having a knight on g5. So probably now the d4 push is justified because he have a knight on g5 protected by the bishop on c1, and the bishop on c4 already attacks the f7 pawn. So a combo between the knight on g5 and a bishop on c4 can really make some trouble for the black pieces on f7 square. So bishop to c7, just stepping away and preparing, for example, d6, or even at some point d5 if you already have the knight on f6 to push the d5 square. Knight to g5, and this was dynamic from Hikaru, or dynamic from Fabiano Caruana, but the answer from Nakamura was a little bit like an accuracy. It's a mistake to play knight to h6 in this position because it allows white, I would say, to open up the position, or I don't know, to push d4, to push f4, excuse me, or to push even c3 to gain tempo. So c3, you're gonna arrange back that knight on d4, and I'm simply gonna bring the queen on f3. So there is now 3 pieces that are forcing the threat on f7. Knight to h6 wasn't really that good. I mean, the only move probably to make things clear for black pieces was to play knight to e6 and aiming at simply capturing that knight on e6. For example, he plays knight to e6 in this position. White is advised to capture that knight on e6, either with his knight on g5 or the bishop on c4. Although this bishop is very important, you should keep it because f7 can be at some points very weak and very vulnerable. So in this position, white should immediately play an f4. Open the position up. Even if he takes the knight on g5, you take with the pawn, and now we have this rook aiming at this f7 pawn, and the bishop on c4 aiming at f7 pawn. So huge threats played by white, huge threats thought by white, and black is facing a dilemma at the very first 10 moves. But all of these wasn't played, and knight to h6 was played. And in this position, I would definitely play f4 for white, opening everything up. Even if he castles, you take the pawn. He takes with his bishop, and you play c3. He need to waste another tempo with his knight, and you bring another piece. For example, f4. He should castle as soon as possible. f5, or even, I don't know, f5 or takes. Probably f5, which is much better because you gain some space advantage in his own king side, and you cramp his pieces. The g6 isn't available for his knight. His knight is stopped. He can't go back to the field. This square is protected. This square is protected. The f4 square that can be good for this knight, either d4 knight or the knight on h6, is deprived. I immediately can capture it by bishop takes on f4. So black is lacking space, he's lacking everything, and he doesn't have anything at all. Probably you may say that white have some dark squares being weakened here, but he have a bishop that can be placed on e3, and nothing will be managed by the black pieces. So let's go back to the main lines. Knight takes, bishop c4, bishop c7, knight g5, knight to h6, and knight to c3. Just bringing another piece and aiming at knight to d5 at some points, bringing the queen to on f3, or simply playing it to h4 or h5, and making some threats. And all this is linked to this f7 pawn. It is very weak. So castle. This wasn't actually interesting to play h3. He wanted to deny the knight on h6 any sort of room. The knight doesn't have any square to play, and playing h3 just plays in the black's hand. You are denying his piece to re-enter the game, but you are allowing him to play something else. rook e8, or just I don't know, a6 b5, doing some counterplay with the black pieces. So h6, king to h8. Now he knows that the f7 pawn is really in danger, so he must push in order to deny white some activity. And this diagonal was very, very scary for black pieces. a4, and as I said, there is a counterplay that should be realized by black by playing a6 b5, but black now is stopped from making that counterplay. Now white blocked that with a4, which means the b5 square is impossibly to have any pawn on b5. So a6 b5 is simply out of the blue. It's gonna be pushed right now by the black pieces, and even if it is pushed, some weaknesses gonna be created, and white's gonna simply use them in the endgame. f6, I would say the aim of king to h8 was to weaken a little bit the light squares, but at the same time to get rid of the knight on g5. It's very annoying and very creepy to have it there. So knight to f3, knight to g8. Well, it is understandable that you're gonna play knight to g8 because the bishop on c1 will be happy to exchange himself for the knight on h6. The smallest variation, if for example you play, some stupid move, for example a6, I'll definitely take the knight on h6, creating some weaknesses. Bishop takes on h6, pawn takes on h6, and then this pawn is weak, this pawn is weak, these squares are, unstoppably weak, and I'm gonna use the simple plan of playing knight to h4 and knight to f5, of course after getting rid of this knight. Knight to h4, knight to f5, bringing my queen to h5 square because now it is very weak and easily to exploit, and I will simply make use of my pieces to attack your naked king and weaken the king and destroy the king that does not have anything at all. So knight to g8, that was the aim, bringing the knight another square, which is usually in this position from knight to g8, knight to e7, probably knight to c6, and supporting this knight on d4, probably exchanging himself for the knight on f3, and then bringing this knight from e7 to c6 to d4. So here, and here. But you're gonna have a superfluous piece. That's why you must exchange this knight on f3 to have a room for this one on g8. So knight to d5, as expected, knight to e7, c3. Now I think he should exchange himself. There's no way I could think of letting my knight on d4 go back to c6. You're gonna have so many superfluous pieces and no space at all. So knight takes, queen takes, and b6. Well, he knows already that the bishop on c7 is gonna be captured anyway, so he places his pawns on the dark squares, I would say. Rook to d1, bishop to b7, bishop to e3. Well, now you're gonna have a big dilemma. The bishop on c7 doesn't do much. How are you gonna play with that bishop? It's a very bad piece. Inside the pawn chain doesn't do much. You're gonna have a problem with that bishop. Queen to g4. What's the aim of queen to g4? What's the aim of queen to g4? Probably just securing the light squares by playing f3 at some point and simply bringing the queen in an aggressive position toward the king side. Rook to b8, b4. Well, he want to open up the position, but I would say he definitely had something on the king side. Why he wanted to play on the queen side by b4? You are simply playing in the black's hand by pushing b4. It is advisable for black to take, even if you have a d6 backward pawn, because it is blocked by the knight on d5. He will have some space advantage, some open c-file or half open c-file. So b4, the only move here for black pieces was to take on d5. He lacks space, he lacks everything. Bishop takes on d5, bishop takes on d5. If you want to really play against this pawn, white is advised to take on d5 with his rook, and then this one will be here on d1, and then queen e2, queen d2, and attacking this pawn. And here the advantage isn't really good for isn't that much for white pieces. It's equal position. Even this bishop does suck at c7. The bishop sucks at c7. It's like a big pawn, my friend. It's like a big pawn, but it's, you know, doing something, protecting this one, and doing some nasty stuff. Some rusty stuff, mother, huh? Okay, let's go back to the main line, brother. Let's go back to the main line. Fabiano Caruana, let's go back to the main line, brother. I am the brother. Okay, so b4, bishop c8. Well, he wanted simply to place his bishop with tempo and to place it on e6 because he does not do much on b7, and he wants probably to have a rook on b8 to control some breaks, you know, some future breaks. Queen to e2, knight takes, bishop takes, queen e7, queen c4, f5. Black has to do something. I mean, you can't just wait white to do anything he wants, and the aim of queen to c4 was simply to protect this e6 square and to deny bishop penetration to e6. So he lacks some space advantage, he lacks some coordination between the pieces, but he wants to create something with this f5 push. Pawn takes, bishop takes. This is some weird move, some top GM move that I can't understand at this point, even after, you know, some months. But I will try to understand it right now. I'll try to analyze. Rook to a2. What's the move here? What's the move here? What's the move here? What's the move here? Well, I would say he wanted psychologically to trick black pieces, to trick Hikaru Nakamura by playing rook to a2 because he wanted probably at some time to push the a5. If he's denied the push on a5, he's simply gonna have rook a2 to simply d2. He doesn't have to play rook to d2 and then rook a to d1. He will change the position of the rook on a1, rook a to a2, and then rook a2 to d2. Psychologically, that is much better than having this rook placed on d2. So rook a2, bishop c8, rook a to d2. Okay, this was played. Okay, I understand a little bit chess. I am Fabiano Caruana. You know, I look like him, and I wish that I have his play style. a5, queen to e2. Is it a waste of move? Is it a waste of tempo in this position? I don't know why he played that move. I'm not Hikaru Nakamura. I'm not the #1 rated in the world in blades section. Rook to b2. Bishop d7. Well, that's a problem. He invites you to push the b5 pawn so that you can have a bad bishop on d5. You're gonna have a sucking bishop on d5 that doesn't do much. Rook. Okay, this was an accuracy. You should have simply played either b5 or take on a5. If you take, you will have a weakness on a6, and you can simply penetrate. And this pawn, for example, I will show the variation. B takes. B takes. It's not really a weakness here because he have another weakness himself. Rook d to b1. Well, you can say it to me, if he takes on a4, what's gonna happen? Well, what's gonna happen is easy. I'll exchange everything. Rook takes on b8, rook takes on b8, probably another exchange. Rook takes on b8, bishop takes on e8, and queen to a6. Queen a6, rook queen a2, probably. Well, queen a6, he does have, you know, some. Yeah, he will simply protect the bishop on queen a6. He will play bishop d7, or bishop c7, excuse me, to protect the pawn. But if he plays queen to a2, you are attacking the bishop on a4 and the pawn on a5 indirectly. If he plays, for example, queen to d7, there is a blunder probably, or deviation. Bishop to e6, queen to e8, and bishop to f7. Queen to b5, bishop to c4, and this is a draw because, I don't know, if you go back, for example, if you take, I take, and the pawn is, you know, is dead lost. Oh, of course, he can't take the bishop. What I'm doing, I'll simply take his queen. Okay, so let's go back to the main line of the inaccuracy played by my idol, Fabiano Caruana. Well, in chess, not in life, in chess. You should take the good things about somebody only in his field of expertise. So, Fabiano Caruana is a good player, the third highest rated player above all time. Uh, so we must respect him. We should respect him. He's a good player. And Hikaru Nakamura too. So the greatest player above all time. Uh, he's good. He's good. He's the greatest. Rook A1. Even he made this mistake, he is still the greatest of all time. The greatest above all and all time. This is a big, it's not a blunder, because a blunder is simply to make use of your opponent's mistake. So for chess.com, they indicate that this is a blunder because simply he didn't make use of the rook a1 mistake, and you should have played a takes on b4 to make this pawn very weak, and then he can bring his rook on a8 at some points after taking rid of this bishop on d5. That's why. So it's a top level bullshit, top level crazy shit. So rook a1, rook to c8, or rook f to c8, queen to d3, bishop to e8, queen to c4. It's just a waste of tempo, or simply denying black of the bishop f7 square. b5, a takes, queen g4, rook to cd, cb8, bishop b c4, rook to b7, bishop to d5, rook a7. I would definitely capture here. For me, I would capture or simply double the rooks by rook b2 to a2, probably. Queen e2, a4. Now, some, you may crazingly, if you can invent such a word, you may say that black have a4 push and a pass pawn, so obviously he may have some crazy stuff in the endgame, but that's not. The pawn is blocked, he can't do anything with it. b5, bishop f7. Now, because you allowed the bishop on f7 to be placed on f7. Bishop takes, queen takes, a3, rook to b3. Although rook a2 was much better because there is no bishop on f7 to protect the a2 square. But, I don't know, he played rook to b3, queen to f7, queen to e7 to f8. Why this is a blunder? It's not a blunder, just not using the advantage that you have. They say that you should have taken on a3, but he wanted to keep the pawn on b5, so he must protect it first. a2, now rook to b2, and well, this endgame is good for me as Fabiano Caruana, as Hamza, as white. The pawn gonna be captured, and he gonna simply make use of the a2 pawn. Takes. Okay, this was nice. Breaking the pawn structure. If you take, I will take the pawn on b5. If you don't take, I will take anyway. This was a good move by Nakamura, making use of this c4 weak pawn. If you take the pawn on d5, I will take the pawn on b5, and you don't have a pass pawn anymore. So white is advised to do something. Take, check, bishop b8. Why? This is not a good move. I mean, you are simply pinning the bishop with the king. You should have simply played king to f7. Or, is this a blunder, king to f7? Yes, it's a blunder because rook to a7, so it's a good move. What I know, I don't know nothing. Check, bishop e8, bishop. It is advisable, I would say, if you want to really reach a drawish endgame, to take on c5. You take on b8 with check, you go with your king to f7, and he plays rook to d8, protecting the pawn, but I will simply go to e7 and I will take the pawn, and that will be a draw. King to f7, bishop a3, e4, g4. g4 is simply aiming at blocking, the f5 square for the black king, and the bishop on a3 is already protecting some dark squares, so you won't penetrate in my king side. h5, well, the pawn breaks doesn't work every single time, Mr. Nakamura. h5 isn't really a good move. I will simply take and gain a pawn, and we have to face some dilemma. I will take. Did he just play the bishop to e5? Checkmate. Why? Why the beep? Why you played bishop to e5? Did you simply miss a mate in one? Are you blind? Are you blind? What are you doing, my friend? Are you blind? Are you blind? What are you doing? Bishop e5, rook on f8 mate. The g6 pawn or the h5 pawn is protecting the g6 square. The e6 square is protected by the d5 pawn. The f6 is protected by the rook on f8, g8, e8, e7. Everything is protected. Why the beep? You missed a mate in one. You bloody. You missed a mate in one. You missed a mate in one. Mate. Beep. Okay, so far everything was good. I would say some inaccuracies played by Nakamura, played by Fabiano. Obviously, they're not chess engines. They're not Stockfish 28 or 37. They're human beings. They make mistakes. They make some inaccuracies, some blunders, some imprecisions, and that's just normal. They're playing the final game of the final day of this tournament. One of them gonna win some big, huge bucks. Gonna win at least $20,000. So it is normal to have some stress because you are playing against the best player in the world, Fabiano Caruana. That's why rook to f8 is missed, and there's stress, and there's tremendous stress, and that's, well, that's normal for Nakamura to have, although he's recognized to be the best player of all time in regards of his blitz skills and rapid skills. But when you face Nakamura, when you face Fabiano Caruana, Mr. Nakamura, you must suffer. You must suffer, my friend. And that was it. The game concluded in a mate in one. It's a huge and weird mate. It's like the windmill with the bishop on a3 and the rook on f8, like the bishop on b2 and the rook on g7, controlling the diagonal and making some tremendous blurry shit to, to the black pieces. So the game concluded in winning. Devastating, catastrophic way of winning from the white pieces. It's like a, nightmare for the black pieces in this position. But, it's not that bad. It's not that catastrophic because he won at least $10,000. He got mated and he won $10,000 at least. What did we won? Streaming chess. So, we're gonna analyze another game, inshallah. And, yeah, just for a PS note, I changed the piece setup because they were across here. And we as Muslims, we do not allow such thing. We don't play with cross. We don't play with some images or some figures. So I deleted or I changed the way the chess pieces, are displayed. From a cross here, from a huge cross to simply that point. Here it's, I don't know, it's a cross or it's a simple sign of a plus, but that's not really, that's not shown as a big cross. So I will try to adjust the pieces as soon as possible, as much as I can, to play with the halal setup. Halal halali. Goodbye.